Graham Stewart to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Turner. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and to see the Minister in her place. I'm assuming that the responsible Minister for this area of policy is still the Minister for Aberafan Maesteg, which I'm probably mispronouncing, and the Minister is nodding, so I understand he has to be somewhere else, but it's great to see the Minister in her place. I've organised this debate today, Mr Turner, to call on the government to implement the Down Syndrome Act, because it was 3 years ago, members of the House will be interested to note, that it received royal assent. So here in the Mother of Parliaments, an Act of Parliament was passed with the democratic engagement of everyone across the House, and 3 years later, it still hasn't been implemented. And therefore, it is about time that it was, because we need it. The first requirement, the first command of that Act was that the government should issue guidance because of the specific needs of people with Down syndrome. It should issue such guidance in order to guide local authorities, health authorities, education authorities, everyone, in fact, engaged in the support of people with Down syndrome. Mr Turner, the various versions of draft guidance have been produced, but none have been even complete in the coverage of that which is required, let alone have any of them been adequate. In 2022, the then Minister for Care and Mental Health, the previous member for Chichester, assured us, and I quote, that this guidance will be fit for purpose so we can ensure people with Down syndrome can access the support they need. And the final guidance will be published next year. Well, the previous government did not fulfil that pledge, and we sit here today with people with Down syndrome still not seeing this historic act fully in force. As I say, the versions so far, my understanding, and I don't claim any great expertise, Mr Turner, but my understanding of the versions so far is that they have been flawed in a number of ways. Instead of recognising the unique needs of people with Down syndrome, the draft versions of the guidance reduce it simply to a type of subset of a type of learning disability. And this limited perspective does a disservice to those with Down syndrome. For instance, individuals with Down syndrome often require tailored speech and language therapy, yet the most recent version of the guidance published in December only makes vague references to specialist therapy. My friend, former member, the Right Honourable Sir Liam Fox, who was the driving force behind the Act, put it perfectly. And I quote, "This legislation was specifically, Mr Turner, for those with Down syndrome, as a definable collection of predictable medical conditions with specific life challenges." And the Act itself reads, "to make provision about meeting the needs of persons with Down syndrome and for connected purposes." In trying to cater to all individuals with learning disabilities, the guidance misses the mark, failing to provide for the very people it was meant to support when it received royal assent 3 years ago. There are, however, Mr Turner, you'll be pleased to learn, reasons to be optimistic, because the Prime Minister, quite rightly, has pledged to lead a government of builders, not blockers. So we can all stand united, I'm sure, across this chamber, with MPs from all political backgrounds, showing a shared consensus that this guidance needs to be built, it needs to be issued, and we need to get blockers out of the way. We can have an agreement that people with Down syndrome must be recognised as having specific needs, not just generic ones, and that support must be in place to ensure they have equal access to opportunities to thrive in all aspects of life. What is truly disappointing is that the blockers of progress are not really elected representatives or indeed ministers, but I fear civil servants, those entrusted with carrying out the will of Parliament. And I think too many have obstructed efforts by ministers from 2 different governments to implement this Act. Despite repeated promises, we still haven't seen the creation of an effective cross-ministerial task force. And I hope the Minister may be able to comment on that, because if there is blockage, if there's resistance within the government machine, then it needs ministers to come together. Perhaps doesn't need to be some permanent task force, but a 1, 2, perhaps 3 meetings maximum, get together, make sure that the will of Parliament is brought to fruition. Engagement with key stakeholders has been less than adequate. When the stakeholder group was formed to lead on this work, there was no consultation with Sir Liam Fox, the sponsor of the bill, or Rachel and Ken Ross, the founding officers of the National Down Syndrome Policy Group, who also should have been included and who are a driving force behind the thinking of the bill. And I don't think that's good enough, and it's not a party political point. The Prime Minister has my full support to ensure the Minister here today and her colleague are empowered to do what they were partly appointed to do, which is fully implement this Act. I will, Mr Turner, say a little bit more about Down syndrome. What exactly is it? Down syndrome is a genetic condition caused by a chromosomal anomaly. While most people have 46 chromosomes, individuals with Down syndrome have 3 copies of chromosome 21 in each cell rather than 2. There are an estimated 47,000 people living with Down syndrome in the UK, making it the most common chromosomal condition. People with Down syndrome are achieving, the good news is, Mr. Turner, people with Down syndrome are achieving more than ever before, attending mainstream schools, gaining meaningful employment, making invaluable contributions to our communities, as well as living longer. But, Mr. Turner, there's a risk that we might see this progress as a reason to rest on our laurels. Instead, it shows the huge potential that people with Down syndrome have if only we could unlock it, and the urgent need to do more. There should be no limit to our ambitions for people with Down syndrome. That's why we shouldn't wait one more day than we need to deliver the guidance promised in the Down Syndrome Act. The first step, Mr. Turner, towards meaningful change is the improvement of healthcare. People with learning disabilities die on average 24 years younger than those without, and are twice as likely to die from treatable conditions. So whether due to significant delays in diagnosis, unsafe hospital discharges, or poor coordination between the NHS and other services, one thing is clear: many of these deaths are preventable. Now, doctors certainly don't mean to harm people with Down syndrome. Instead, it's likely that poor health care results from a lack of specific knowledge and training needed so that they can give people with Down syndrome the tailored support that condition requires. Following the passage of the Act, NHS England issued statutory guidance in 2023 mandating that every integrated care board appoint a named executive lead at board level to drive better outcomes for people with Down syndrome. This was because to provide accountability within the system. So people say, well, the ministers are responsible, not civil servants. Actually, in the implementation, in the delivery on the ground across the country, of course it's civil servants who are responsible, Mr. Turner. That's why it was the explicit part of the campaign around this Act and an explicit promise from a minister at the dispatch box that we would see people appointed, not so they could be hidden, but so they could be publicly available, so they could be contacted, they could be asked what they're doing within their area, not only to challenge the health system, but to challenge schools on what they were doing, why there was in so many parts of the country, automatically a Down syndrome child is assumed to need to go to a specialist school. And a lot of the evidence is they do better in mainstream, but only, of course, if the people in the schools have been given the support and the skills in order to deliver that improvement. Yet, when I sought a few days ago, Mr. Turner, to find out these named accountable individuals to allow the Down syndrome community to hold the government and the system to account, of the 42 ICBs in England, I was only able to find 3 with a publicly nominated lead, and 2 of them are called David Jarrett. So, Minister, can I ask what is going on? Can we make sure that these are publicly named, they are prominent on their website, that lists are issued, they are kept up to date, and everyone in the Down syndrome community can easily find out who it is that is responsible for the delivery of these services and is there to make sure not only health, but the wider community of public services is a servant to people with Down syndrome rather than turning that Down syndrome person into a supplicant. Next up, after healthcare, of course, is education, which is crucial to the life chances of people with Down syndrome. Research suggests, as I've said, that people with Down syndrome most often achieve better outcomes if they're in mainstream education, provided it's appropriate for their specific needs compared to those in specialist schools. Now, while officials in the Department for Education are best placed to offer guidance on this, it highlights the importance of an effective cross-ministerial task force, because we all know what it's like, and the Minister will have discovered this already in her relatively short time as a Minister, is other departments, that, where it wasn't made here, tend to be quite resistant. And the only way to cut through and make sure that sufficiently senior civil servants take on board actual acts of Parliament and do what they're obliged to do on a statutory basis, sometimes is for ministers to be called together, issue such instruction and push the system to do what it is supposed to do. Otherwise, they will sit in their own lane, following the particular priorities of the particular Secretary of State in that department, utterly ignoring their obligation, yes, their statutory obligation, to deliver on an act of Parliament. So, while some progress has been made, there is more to do. Statistics from NHS Digital reveal that only 6% of working-age adults with learning disabilities who receive long-term social care are employed. In other words, 94% aren't. When you meet the people who are and you see what they can do, you realise how many more are there? If only we put in place the right coordinated system, how many more could have much more fulfilling lives? Get the incentives aligned, because right now, if there are fears about losing benefits, it may be not the Down syndrome person themselves. They may not even be spoken to. Could be members of their family. Could be the social worker decide, oh, it's best just take no risks, keep them on benefits, rather than supporting them into a job where they can be full members of society and contribute and benefit from that activity. Even more troubling, 68% of those employed work less than 16 hours a week. And these figures aren't just numbers, they reflect the deep systemic barriers that still limit opportunities for people with Down syndrome in the workforce. Despite a range of initiatives, it's clear that we need stronger, sustained efforts to ensure people with Down syndrome can access fulfilling long-term employment. Only then will we truly break down the barriers to their independence and potential. So I hope that it is by now clear to the Minister why we must break down these barriers, and why it's critical that the will of Parliament, in the form of an Act of Parliament, 3 years old, really is upheld and implemented, and that change is delivered without further delay. The time for action is now, so I would be grateful if the Minister was able to answer some of the following questions. When will the cross-ministerial task force that was promised be created? At the very least, if she could speak to her colleague and push to have one. I know, colleagues, it's very hard to get ministers to turn up for some other department's cross-ministerial task force, so it often takes personal contact, an agreement that it's not going to run on forever, but say, look, this is important, let's get this over the line, please come along, get the right minister at the right time, sufficient seniority around the table with a real will to enact change and make a difference. If that could come out of today, that would be fantastic. Can she ensure that the consultation group contains only Down syndrome specific organisations to ensure that legislation supports people with the condition as is set out in the Act? There's been a tendency to open it up to everyone engaged in learning disability in terms of consultations so far. You have people who, with little or no understanding of the specifics of Down syndrome, who've been engaged in the consultations run by civil servants, and the whole thing has kind of has come into the ground and lost its specific focus as provided for by the Act. I've been informed by the National Down Syndrome Policy Group that the draft guidance issued to sector groups contains significant omissions. So would the Minister commit, and I always find it much easier to commit to meetings on behalf of colleagues than I did for myself, so I hope I can tempt the Minister to do so now, commit to a meeting with Rachel and Ken Ross, which I would also love to attend as soon as possible. They are the founding officers of the National Down Syndrome Policy Group, and they do exceptional work for people with Down syndrome, and they are in the gallery today, alongside Millie, who was gave evidence recently to the all-party parliamentary group, and is always available to correct any of us when we get our policies wrong, as Millie can surely attest. Can the Minister provide a clear date, an aspiration from the government, given it's been 3 years, when can we get this guidance so it's comprehensive? When can we get it ready in a final version to go through all the sign-off processes of government? And when can we look for it to be officially issued? These are not just procedural questions, they're vital to ensuring that the promises made to people with Down syndrome are delivered, and that we move forward with the urgency and specificity that this issue demands. Minister, every MP in this chamber, and they'll speak for themselves, but I'm sure stands with you in making this effort. And on behalf of the 47,000 people with Down syndrome across the country, we urge you to ensure that a suitable and proper version of this guidance is quickly produced, one that truly reflects the experiences and needs of people with Down syndrome, and specifically people with Down syndrome. If someone alongside this exercise wants to produce separate guidance that's more generic, fine. But can we make sure that the guidance identified in the Act is delivered for people with Down syndrome, and that it's published and fully implemented without delay? So there's a great opportunity ahead for all of us, Mr. Turner. We can be part of delivering meaningful, lasting change for thousands of people, both now and for generations to come. And I hope, with the support of colleagues, which I'm sure will be there from across the chamber, that, Minister, we will send you out today determined to make sure your colleague does the right thing. Thank you very much.
Well, I'll remind members that they should bob if they want to speak in the debate. The question is that this House has considered Down syndrome. Jen Craft.
Thank you very much, Mr. Turner, and it's an honour to serve under your chairship, and I'd like to congratulate the honourable member for securing this very important debate today. I'd like to briefly speak about one aspect of Down syndrome that is up till now, by and large, overlooked: Down syndrome regression disorder. It affects roughly 1 to 2% of people with Down syndrome, and usually comes into prevalence between the ages of 10 and 30. This is a truly horrific condition. People with Down syndrome regression disorder almost overnight change. One mum who I met, whose son has developed Down syndrome regression disorder, overnight became non-responsive, uncommunicative, catatonic, and she said it was like everything that was him had left. Young people who have previously held down jobs, voluntary positions, had many interests, hobbies and a love of life lose the ability to speak. They lose continence. They retreat into themselves. This is not a gradual change either. It is stark, it is unexpected, and it is profound. And there is a fundamental lack of awareness of this condition. It's often diagnosed wrongly as early onset dementia or late diagnosed autism, even though it does not fit the profile of either of these conditions. There is no pathway currently for diagnosis, and progress is quite often fraught. Finding a clinician who recognises the symptoms and will treat as well is by and large impossible. There is hope, however. 80% of people who receive treatment in a timely manner and the right treatment actually manage to achieve some prospect of recovery. And I want to be clear that if this happens to a child who does not have Down syndrome, a typical child, if suddenly overnight they stopped eating, stopped taking any interest in jobs, became catatonic, were completely unresponsive, it would be treated as a medical emergency. People whose children have Down syndrome and have finally managed to speak to the right clinician have been told, you need to take your child to A&E. If this was a typical child, this would be happening. But because that child has Down syndrome, it's overlooked. So I would like to ask the Minister if she will meet with me and individuals affected by this disorder to discuss how we can best create awareness and what their thoughts are on how we manage to create a pathway for this to be diagnosed and treated. And I'd also like to touch very briefly on my kind of reflections as a parent of a child with Down syndrome and what I think would be helpful in the space in general. I think many of us feel that some kind of pathway when you have a child and they are born with Down syndrome would be extraordinarily useful. When your child is born or you receive an antenatal diagnosis, you very often think, what lies ahead? What can I expect? What does my future look like? And we know Down syndrome is the most common genetic condition. We know that, for example, 50% of children born with Down syndrome will have a heart condition. We know there's a higher prevalence of things like leukemia. We know that, by and large, they do not have a very strong immune system, as I know every flipping winter when my child gets cold after cold after cold. I have gained a lovely level of response and knowledge about various parts of my child's condition and what to expect. We've cobbled it together through other parents, through WhatsApp groups, through Facebook groups, sometimes through speaking to professionals, sometimes through speaking with support groups. What would be helpful is to have that set out officially, to know what lies ahead, to know what you can expect, to know what to look for. I mean, really, sort of very small thing. People with Down syndrome, sometimes when they have a fever, the temperature goes down rather than up. It's really unusual. It's not that unusual in the condition, and it's quite useful to know if you're a parent, and to know how to diagnose things, and they don't present with typical conditions. Really awful things. Parents have lost children to sepsis because it doesn't present as it would of a typical child. It's really useful. And as people transition into adulthood and make those steps into the adult world, an idea of how people with learning disabilities and Down syndrome can be expected to be treated. What kind of things help them to live full and happy lives? You know, what kind of thing as their parents and caregivers should you be encouraging them to take part of? This is what would be extraordinarily helpful. And I would like to end, I'm going to keep this very brief because I know there are other members that want to speak. And I would just like to end on a reflection that Friday is World Down Syndrome Day. And in our community, we typically see it as a day of celebration, as well as we try to have a challenge to policymakers. And this is to make sure that we have the right support this year is what we are asking for. And I would just like to say, because there will be people who will see this and they will be receiving a diagnosis of Down syndrome. They might be receiving it today. They might be receiving it antenatally, postnatally. And when I received this diagnosis 7 years ago, it was a shock. You know, I felt like the carpet had been pulled from underneath my feet, and I was devastated. And I look back at that moment with shame, to think that I was so devastated at this news of this person who became the beating heart of our family. She is joyous. She's not always happy. That's a misconception because she's not. And I will say to people if they say that, oh, did I get a wrong one? No, she's not. She's I want to say stubborn. She is stubborn. I like calling girls stubborn. She's determined. She's feisty. She's a fantastic dancer. A community event we went to, I'm there as the MP. No, she's got me up dancing on the middle of the floor. Not in the background. I'm right there. She drags me into the heart of it. She's funny. She's really, really funny. She's so kind. Her sister, there's a really brilliant statistic. 95% of people who have a sibling with Down syndrome think that they have enhanced their life. She has made me a better person. She's made my husband a better person. People who meet her, I mean, when she loves deeply and she loves hard. And people that meet her, they share that and they feel that love with her. And the brilliant thing, if you have a child with Down syndrome, you join this wonderful community. Wonderful community. I have met some of my best friends through this community. We're there to support each other. And there are some brilliant groups. I'm going to give a shout out to Faye and Claire from our local Down syndrome group who welcomed us with open arms, who showed us what our life is. We're on the scenic route, we call it. We're not on the quick path. We're taking the scenic route. It's a lot better than the casual straight line. And who wants normal? It's boring. They showed us that joy. Upwards with Downs in Harlow. They are fantastic, a fantastic group. They're organising so many wonderful events, including a holiday that we've been on with people who get it. Downright excellent in Hackney. And to my wonderful friends, Charlotte and Kirsty, what a fantastic community we have. Happy Down Syndrome Day. I love all of you. And if anyone is ever worried about what the future looks like, come and talk to me. Come and talk to any of us, because we can tell you it's not just going to be okay, it's going to be brilliant.
I'm going to be imposing a time limit of 4 minutes to show us how to do it very well. I'm going to call former Education Secretary Damien Hines.
Turner, it truly is a pleasure to see you in the chair, and it truly is a pleasure and a privilege to follow the Honourable Lady. I don't know if I can, but there are times in this place, in this room and in these buildings when you feel it's a real privilege to have heard from a colleague, and particularly when they share something that's very personal but helps to inform our democracy. And she's just done that times over, and I thank her. I'm sure we all thank her very much for it. I also want to thank and commend my right honourable friend from Beverley and Holderness for securing this important debate. It is, as the honourable lady said, it is. We're coming up to World Down Syndrome Day. It is Down Syndrome Awareness Week, and so particularly apt that we should be having this debate. But it's my honour to co-chair with the honourable gentleman from Mid Cheshire, the all-party parliamentary group. It's not Down syndrome was not something I knew a lot about. It just so happens that the co-founders of the Down syndrome policy group, Ken and Rachel Ross, happen to be constituents of mine. But my God, through that link, I have, and she was just talking about it, the community that you come into contact with. It is the most enormous, enormously wonderful thing. We had an event a couple of weeks ago over in Portcullis House. There was a flash mob in Portcullis House. There was dancing, there was singing, there were also challenging speeches from members of the Down syndrome community, who it is always important to hear from directly. We've also in the APPG we've heard a number of testimonies of people's frustration with the education system. I'm pleased that Down syndrome is now included as a category in the school centre, which means it is possible to take a more targeted approach. But those issues then carry on into employment, as my right honourable friend said. There is so much work to be done. But this Act, the Act of Parliament carried through by Sir Liam Fox, was a really, really important milestone, a really important achievement to build on. And I've realised I haven't really got time to say all this, so I'll just very quickly say I just want to commend again Sir Liam for the work he did then, and also his continued advocacy today. And I also want to recognise the work of Ken and Rachel and everything that they have done supporting that Act through Parliament and everything since. In terms locally, for me as a constituency MP, the work they've done with the Portsmouth hospitals on a down-specific maternity pathway, in a completely different way, working with BAFTA on making sure the voices of people with Down syndrome are heard in mainstream films, and the work on special schools and making sure more children can be in a mainstream setting when that is right for them. And I also want to recognise the work of all MPs who've been involved, including, I have to say, this Minister, who I know was on the Bill Committee with Sir Liam Fox at the time of that private member's bill. But as my right honourable friend said, it is now years since that bill was enacted. And it is really important that we press on with this guidance, and that it is specifically about Down syndrome. That is not in any way to reduce the issues faced by people with a broader set of learning difficulties or disabilities, but this is specifically the Down Syndrome Act to look at those particular issues and challenges. We need that ministerial cross-departmental task force, and to make sure the guidance is as sound as it can be and as quick as it can be. I want to thank her colleague, the member for Aberafon Mestig, for his continued engagement, and we continue to extend an invitation to him and to the honourable lady to join us in the all-party parliamentary group when they can, to hear further from members of the community how important this is to them.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Sir, it's a pleasure to serve on your chairmanship. I declare an interest as co-chair of the APPG on Down syndrome. I want to start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Beverley and Holderness for his comprehensive speech and on securing this debate that holds immense significance for individuals with Down syndrome and their families, especially as we've heard as we approach World Down Syndrome Day on Friday, a day so chosen because the 21st of the third month represents the triplication of the 21st chromosome, which is the cause of Down syndrome. I will, of course, be focusing my comments today on the Down Syndrome Act, a landmark piece of legislation that recognises the unique needs of people with Down syndrome and the ongoing work to update and implement the guidance that will help bring it to life. As we've already heard, there are an estimated 47,000 people with Down syndrome in the UK, yet despite being the most common chromosomal condition, people with Down syndrome continue to face barriers to achieving their full potential, and this is where the Down Syndrome Act comes in. For the first time ever, we have legislation focused specifically on this community, taking into account the distinct health, developmental and educational needs that are unique to people with Down syndrome. With the right interventions, many people with Down syndrome can lead full, independent lives, attending mainstream schools, gaining employment and participating fully in society. But to achieve this and to improve life outcomes for people with Down syndrome, we need more than just general disability support. We need Down syndrome-specific strategies. And this is where the long overdue guidance will play its part. It's the guidance that will determine the success of the Act, the guidance that will be a practical roadmap that provides clarity on how the principles of the Act should be implemented. Without it, the Act will just remain words on the page. However, the preparation and implementation of the guidance has faced challenges. We know that there have been significant delays in updating the guidance, but more importantly, there are concerns that the current draft of the guidance does not reflect the original intent of the Act and lacks a Down syndrome-specific focus in line with the government's statutory duty. So I thank the Minister, not in his place, but the Minister Rahabaravan, for writing to me yesterday to assure me that he has listened to those concerns and that he is engaging with stakeholders and he's working with all relevant government departments to produce a second draft of the guidance with a view to putting it out for consultation by the summer. My ask of the Minister is to ensure that the second draft of the guidance reflects the feedback that's been raised by the National Down Syndrome Policy Group and the Down Syndrome Association and others. I'm sure that he will agree that we need guidance that is robust, inclusive and reflective of the needs of the community that it's intended to support. Importantly, accountability mechanisms must be included to ensure that individuals and organisations responsible for the implementation are held to their obligations, while additional direction and training should be considered for external bodies to help them fully understand their roles in effectively implementing the guidance in the first place. I hope the Minister will give due consideration to these points as the second draft is being prepared. The Down Syndrome Act and its guidance offer an incredible opportunity to improve outcomes for people with Down syndrome, but we must ensure that the guidance reflects the specific needs of the community it aims to serve. To ensure this is the case, I hope the Minister will agree on behalf of her colleague to meet with representatives of the APPG on Down syndrome and the National Down Syndrome Policy Group to discuss and address our key concerns. By working together, we can create a future where people with Down syndrome are not only included, but truly empowered to reach their full potential.
Jim Shannon.
First of all, can I say what a pleasure it is to serve under your chairship for the second time today. Wish you well in the new role that you undertake, and hope we will have many engagements in this chamber. Can I thank the honourable gentleman for Beverley and Holderness for raising this issue today. He's taken the mantle on well, and congratulations, and introduced it. And I'm going to speak, if I can, in the short time I have. I'm going to give 3 examples from Northern Ireland, all inspirational. One of them I know personally, or sorry, I know the parents personally, I should say, and thereby I know the young boy in particular. Many people will have seen James Martin from Belfast. I think when we mention the name right away, and I know the Honourable Lady, who has always has a close eye on Northern Ireland and what's happening there, will know the person. Last year at the Academy Awards, he was an inspiration to so many to understand that the opportunities are limited for that young man. There's no place in our society for so many different skills and abilities, and I truly am thankful for those who are at pains to portray acceptance in the mainstream. James did us all proud at the Oscars and set the scene for more to be done. From James to young Kate Grant, the second one from Northern Ireland, Northern Ireland's first Down syndrome model to walk at the London Fashion Week. What an inspiration that young lady was as well. It's clear that our society made limits that are being changed, and this can only be a good thing. I think the honourable gentleman, in setting the scene, talked about how it is that we must change the limits and ensure that young people have the opportunities. My parliamentary aid volunteers in their local campaigners clan in Newton Ards. Within her clan is a young boy called young Harry. Harry and his younger sister are intricate members of the groups of children, and his wise man role in the nativity just at Christmas time played his iconic look at the star line with great confidence and gusto. That young man attends a special school and yet integrates so well in this wee group, and the inspirational part of this is that the children around him make no difference with him whatsoever. They don't see him as anything other than just Harry, and there is no Down syndrome label attached to him. They just accept him as he is. So I love to see and hear of this integration taking place in our society. I think the Honourable Gentleman hopes that the integration will be one that we will have across society. We all know that the days of stigmatising Down syndrome children are well in the past, and rightly so. And now is the time to step up and help these children and adults find their place within our society. And I do believe that this is happening more, and this is so positive. I have to state some concern on one thing, if I can. The fact that children with Down syndrome can be aborted up to birth in Northern Ireland under the horrifically imposed abortion regimes is something that's an absolute stain on this House. This House made that decision to bring it in Northern Ireland. I cannot highlight the wonderful steps forward in society without begging once again that the regression of allowing abortion until birth simply because a child has Down syndrome is excluded and removed from the legislation. I put that on record in this House. We voted against it when the time came, but this House, in the last term of Parliament, passed it for Northern Ireland. I will never forget the words of young Heidi Crowther with Down syndrome when urging people not to allow abortion until birth for Down syndrome, when she said, and I quote this young Down syndrome girl, "My life has as much value as anybody else's." This is so true, and their worth to communities around the world is beginning to be understood. We must encourage and support children and adults and parents. And I look to the Minister very much, as I always do, with understanding to ensure that families can have access to support and help throughout this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which is only made richer and stronger through our differences.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair. And may I start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Beverley and Holderness and calling for today's debate. The Down Syndrome Act is simple but brilliant, but powerless without the guidance to accompany it. And therefore it's really timely that we have this debate. And I say timely because the elements within the Act determine the very structure that can support a child through to adulthood, from birth through to work. And I think it's timely and on the three main pillars on which it depends. First of all, around healthcare. At this time, we are putting in place a 10-year NHS plan, putting together the NHS for the future, looking at how we keep ourselves well, putting that early intervention and ensuring that we have got the workforce that is needed for the future. So if this guidance is going to have effect, then we need to ensure that we've got the workforce and the structures in order to support the individual and their families. And therefore, I think the time is now to look at that. And of course, to put in the additional screening and support that somebody with Down syndrome needs in order to optimise their health and keep well throughout their life. Secondly, likewise, we're having a massive review of the education system at the moment. We're looking at the curricular change, and of course we recognise the broadening of the curricula will be much more inclusive as well, and therefore again it's a really timely opportunity as we review SEND, as we look at the whole of the education system, to bring in this guidance, because it can't just be about guidance around Down syndrome looking in, it must be looking out at the other departments. So again, I think the time is now, not least when we look at the data. 80% of children with Down syndrome in primary school, and that dropping to 25 to 37% in secondary school. That deficit in itself indicates that we need significant change within our education system. We need a school system which is nurturing, therapeutic and integrated, so that no child feels on the outside of the education they're rightly entitled to. And thirdly, as we turn to look at the place of work, we need to ensure that there are more opportunities for people with Down syndrome to engage in the labour market. Just yesterday, the government published its plan, Pathways to Work, and I see this plan as a plan in two halves. The first half, enabling more people to be able to access the labour market, to follow the careers of their dreams, but also to have their skills and talents recognised. And we need to ensure that everybody with Down syndrome has that opportunity where it can be afforded. And if not in a formal workplace, volunteering in the community, or indeed being able to have the most life-enhancing opportunities possibly available to them. But as I talk about the second half, I also have deep concern for people with Down syndrome. When we look at the thresholds under the PIP, which have been indicated that people are going to have to score at least 4 points in order to trigger those thresholds to be able to access vital funding to keep people independent, which is the key word within personal independent payments. So we need to ensure right now that we're feeding into that debate and discussion to bring these measures to the fore. Very briefly, I just finally want to reflect. When we get this right, it will be for the benefit of the whole of society. I know in York, I think about those that work in West offices and the cafe there run by United Response, bringing real opportunity around work, and also the once seen theatre company where I see such talent on display. We must get this guidance.
Order. Bobby Dean.
Thank you, Mr Turner. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I also like to thank the Honourable Member for Beverley and Holderness, not only for bringing this debate today, but for articulating the key points around the Act so well. And I can't move on without thanking also the member for Thurrock for her inspiring contribution, and she really did a community proud today. I'd just like to add how this issue came to my attention. I have a constituent called Lucien, who sits on the National Policy Group for Down Syndrome and runs a local group called Get On Downs. I was actually at their annual celebration this morning. We had tea, we had cake, we threw balls around a ball pit, and I wore funky socks as demanded by the event today. So unfortunately, Mr Turner, you can't see them, but I am still wearing them. I got to meet Noah and Lily, Stephen and Charlotte, all people living with Down syndrome and thriving in that loving space that they had there this morning. And I asked Charlotte actually what she would like me to say to the Minister later today, and she told me that she would like to tell her that she is fantastic. So I have done that, and I've shared that to you. I also spoke to the parents, and they told me about the relief of having that space, and also for themselves to be able to speak to other parents and share their experiences. But they also had some very serious points to make about this Act, which they're all aware of. A common thing that came up was about the education system and feeling like they're just not getting the specific needs of Down syndrome children being met, even though the smallest of adaptations and interventions can make such a massive difference. The schools are just not aware of this, and we need to get that guidance sorted for them. I heard a story about somebody who's moving on to post-16 education and the demands of them to take maths and English to a particular level, when actually what they need is the vocational skills. They want to become an animal carer, and they wish that they were just able to have access to that kind of vocational course without the hard requirements on maths and English as well. And also about the more support to stay in work. So Charlotte herself was doing Christmas cover in retail, but the companies are not looking to keep her on. They had warm words for Lucien, or Lou, as I know her as well. They described her as a lifesaver for setting up that local group. And not only for setting up that space, but also for this amazing initiative that she set up with the local hospital trust. As people that may know, that the healthcare information you get at birth can be pretty daunting. It's warning you about some of the things that you're going to have to face as a parent of a child with Down syndrome. But she wanted to flip that on the head and provide care packages to new parents of people with Down syndrome that said congratulations, and talked about all the joys that are ahead of you as well. So I just wanted to recognise that brilliant initiative by Lou. And I think it's fitting that I give the last word to her. These are the questions that she wanted to ask of the Minister. She wanted to know what is happening with the guidance and why the delay. Will the Minister agree to meet with the National Down Syndrome Policy Group? And can the Minister reassure us that the draft guidance will be Down syndrome specific? And she really wanted to labour this point, that there's a specific learning profile and this requires specific interventions. And she put it like this: what is the point in a Down Syndrome Act if it isn't specific to people with Down syndrome? Thank you.
Lib Dem sportsperson Jess Brown-Fuller.
Thank you, Mr Turner. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I would like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Beverley and Holderness for securing this important and timely debate ahead of World Down Syndrome Day this Friday. What a pleasure it was before the debate, because we were slightly delayed, to take the opportunity to chat to marvellous Millie ahead of this debate, who is an incredible advocate for those who have been touched by Down syndrome. And in my constituency of Chichester, we are fortunate to have an incredible charity, the Chichester and Arran Down Syndrome Group, who work tirelessly to fill the gaps left by failings in public service provision. And ahead of this debate, they highlighted to me many of the challenges that people with Down syndrome face, particularly in accessing the support they need throughout their education. One of their core initiatives as a charity is the Bespoke Schools Outreach Programme, which ensures that children with Down syndrome receive the tailored education they require, because they do require additional support throughout their education, yet many families struggle to obtain EHCPs, education, care and health plans, from local authorities. In West Sussex, the picture is stark. Only 3.6% of EHCPs were issued within the statutory time frame of 20 weeks in 2023, and the situation hasn't got much better. These delays force children with Down syndrome to remain in unsuitable educational environments, with their needs not being met, which hinders their opportunities. And then when an EHCP is delivered, most importantly, we need the accountability to see that that EHCP is then actually being delivered. The charity also highlights to me the cliff edge of support that people living with Down syndrome face. So at the age of 18, when they're no longer in an education provision, I was really pleased to visit Together Our Community, shortened to TOC, at their exciting new venue in Chichester, which is due to open next month. That's going to provide a space for the TOC members, and they'll also have a public-facing cafe where adults with additional needs between the ages of 18 and 35 will have the chance to learn and develop essential skills working in the cafe. So for people with Down syndrome, charitable organisations such as these provide vital support and services and give these incredible people the opportunity to thrive, not just survive. And the Down Syndrome Act, introduced in 2022, recognised the needs of those living with Down syndrome and rightly acknowledged that public services must take these needs into account across health, social care, education and other local authority provisions, but the Act must be properly resourced. The NHS website lists a range of specialists that a person with Down syndrome may need to see, including speech and language therapists, physiotherapists, opticians and occupational therapists, yet local organisations consistently report a lack of these essential services, which undermines the opportunities for Down syndrome, for people with Down syndrome to live comfortably or independently. So we're 3 years on from the Act receiving royal assent, and it is not supporting those that it was designed to support. The Liberal Democrats have long called for all individuals with long-term conditions or disabilities to have access to a named doctor, which would shift care from the corridors of hospitals to local communities. But this is especially crucial for people with Down syndrome, who not only have learning disabilities, but are also significantly higher risk of conditions such as dementia, seizures and leukemia, as the Honourable Member for Thurrock mentioned. The impact of social care on people with Down syndrome can also not be overstated, which is why the Liberal Democrats are calling for a comprehensive overhaul of social care policy. So while we welcome the Cross-Party Commission to establish a long-term agreement on social care, we strongly believe that this can be concluded within 1 year, not 3. So while the Down Syndrome Act was a step in the right direction, Mr Turner, real change requires more than warm words. It demands proper funding and meaningful action. From healthcare and social care to employment and independent living, people with Down syndrome deserve better. And as the Honourable Member for Beverley and Holderness stated, the guidance is where we're severely lacking at this moment in time. So the government must prioritise this issue, and we will continue to push for the improvements necessary to enhance quality of life for all. Thank you.
Serve on your chairmanship and respond in this debate. And looking back, it's interesting to see, and I credit the member for Bristol South, now Minister, who spoke on this debate in January 2022, and she said, I quote, "Our constituents expect us to see guidance and perhaps be part of scrutinising it, raising objections and problems and improving it. That is the role of a Member of Parliament." And I think we've seen that exemplified here today. And I'd like to pay credit to the Member for Beverley and Holderness for all he's done to raise this up, but he was actually trumped by the Member of Thurrock, who I pay tribute to for her ability to speak so openly, so personally, and so informed about the issues that is at hand. The Shadow Minister at the time also closed by saying, "This is an example of how Parliament and the proper role of MPs can be made real. That's only a good thing for our constituents," and I agree entirely with her then. So turning to the debate itself, it's unusual to have unanimous feelings from across the House, but we've heard that here today in the debate, and it's an accolade to everyone that we've got this far, but there are still some things that are outstanding, particularly two issues: the progress of seeing the guidance and ensuring they're accurate and effective. It's important to ensure this guidance is robust and reflects the needs of the community, We don't want to rush publishing the guidance so to make sure that key issues aren't addressed, because it would undermine the efforts of the last 3 years and fail the very people it's aimed to support. Now, my former colleague who's been mentioned here, Sir Liam Fox, who put forward the private members' bill, has written to the chair of the Health and Social Care Committee about these reforms. And with your permission, Chair, I'd like to quote some extracts. He said, "When the House of Commons unanimously passed the Down Syndrome Act, it felt like a real dawn had arrived for those with Down syndrome and their family. We were promised new government guidance covering health, education and social care that would phenomenally improve service provision and provide accountability to service users." He then said later on, "Despite repeated promises, we have not yet seen the formation of an effective cross-ministerial task force. There's been little ministerial engagement with stakeholders, with many identical letters being sent out in response to demonstrably different queries. Now, 3 years after the legislation reached the statute book, this is completely unacceptable." He then finished by saying, "I believe that it is now time for both ministers and officials to be held account for the lack of progress and produce coherent guidelines, something that is regarded as a betrayal by many of those who were so encouraged and inspired by the passage of the Down Syndrome Act itself." So therefore, to echo many of the sentiments held in this chamber today, I have some gentle questions about the guidance. But it was interesting to hear the letter has been sent out, and I welcome that from the member from Mid-Cheshire, and I wonder if the Minister will be able to take back maybe a copy of that letter could be put in the House of Commons library for the public and us to all see. So the first question, can the Minister clarify if the updated guidance will be published, and if so, when? Secondly, would she commit to holding a debate or a statement on the guidance to have it laid before Parliament? Thirdly, how will the government monitor compliance with the guidance when it is published? To help the above, the National Down Syndrome Policy Group, who drafted the original Down Syndrome Bill and worked with Mr Fox and previous ministers to support the journey through Parliament, have been trying to engage further with ministers. They've highlighted to me multiple requests to meet the APPG for Down syndrome, the policy group and MPs, but have yet to be successful. So I would again echo the call, would the Minister commit today to her fellow Minister meeting with the policy group and the APPG to follow this up? And getting close to the end, moving on to the theme of World Down Syndrome Day, which is indeed on this Friday, it's improving support systems. Now, we know with the growth of life expectancy for people with Down syndrome, access to social care is going to be critical. Therefore, can the Minister confirm whether the needs of people with Down syndrome will be considered in the first stage of Baroness Casey's commission into adult social care? And with the government's 10-year plan in production, could the Minister outline how Down syndrome will be addressed in the context of this plan? I look forward to hearing from the Minister about how this government will build on the foundations of the Down Syndrome Act and about the strength and enabling of support. If we see it through this prism, the world shines brighter when we see people for their abilities rather than their disabilities.
Minister Karen Smith.
Thank you, Mr Turner, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. And can I congratulate and thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for Beverley and Holderness for securing this debate and giving us all the chance to mark World Down Syndrome Day on Friday. And no one has done that better than my honourable friend for Thurrock this afternoon. Her child, the beating heart of her family, and that joy is absolutely with all of us here this afternoon, and she has spread that joy with us today. We're grateful to her. I'm also grateful to the Honourable Member for Beverley and Holderness for his support of the Down Syndrome Bill, which is now the Act, and which, as he has highlighted, I was pleased to support with my his Right Honourable friend and my constituency neighbour at the time, the former member for North Somerset, and it was a marvellous thing to be part of. I think, as my friend from York Central said, that it was a simple but quite brilliant piece of legislation, and I'm always grateful to the member opposite for re-quoting me back my comments at different times in the dispatch box, hopefully all carefully chosen. This government does want to see a fair Britain where everyone lives well for longer, and I absolutely recognise the importance of the Down Syndrome Act in helping to achieve that, because the Act gives people with Down syndrome the building blocks they need for a healthy life, and we've heard about some of those today, and access to the health and care services they need, receiving the right education, securing living arrangements that work for them and being supported into employment, points that were made by the Honourable Member for Carshalton and Wallington for York Central and by the Lib Dem spokesperson there. By raising awareness and understanding of the needs of people with Down syndrome, we can help ensure every person with Down syndrome has the opportunity to live full and fulfilling lives. And today's debate is an excellent opportunity to come together to mark World Down Syndrome Day. And I commend members that are in the gallery here today, as many others that have been contacted with and are known to members here to mark that important point. This year's theme is improve our support systems is incredibly important, and it is something we're striving to achieve through developing the statutory guidance under the Down Syndrome Act of 2022. We are committed to ensuring that people with Down syndrome receive the care and support they need to lead the lives they want to in their community. However, we know, and we've heard this afternoon, there is significant work to be done to make this a reality. Now, my friend, the Honourable Member for Aberavon and Maesteg, is working hard to implement the Act and to take it forward. Under the Act, the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care is required to give guidance to relevant authorities in health, social care, education and housing services on what they should be doing to meet the needs of people with Down syndrome. And as members have highlighted, the Act was formally commenced on the 18th of March by way of regulations. This brought into force all the provisions of the Act and was a necessary step towards the publication of the guidance. And I do appreciate, I don't think it's been particularly mentioned today, but shortly after that point, obviously, we had that general election, and I appreciate that that is frustrating for campaigners and people involved in this for the delays that may well have happened at that point. Minister Kinnock has written out to sector partners and the all-party parliamentary group on Down syndrome with an update on the guidance and next steps, and this includes our intention to put the guidance out for consultation by the summer. Engagement with people with Down syndrome, their families and supporters, sector colleagues and experts has been invaluable throughout the development of the guidance. Over 1,500 responses were received through a national call for evidence, which has been used to inform the guidance, in addition to sector engagement and a review of the evidence to gain a better understanding of the specific needs of people with Down syndrome and how these can be best met by relevant authorities. On the 26th of November last year, Minister Kinnock convened a roundtable of partners to discuss how we can improve life outcomes for people with Down syndrome and the opportunities that the guidance presents in support of this. And we are grateful for the collective efforts and insights of individuals and organisations across the country, which have enabled us to make great strides in our development of this important piece of guidance. And we do recognise that some time has passed since the Act became law in April 2022. We understand...
Extremely grateful for Minister giving way. Several colleagues have mentioned the need for specificity in this. If she's coming on to that, great. And would it be fair to say it was the intent of the government, I'm not looking for a cast iron promise because we know how challenging these things are, the intent of the government that we should see this guidance issued before the end of this year, all things being well?
Yes. We want to make sure the guidance is published as soon as possible, and we do appreciate that patience while we make that happen. It is important that we have continued to work with people with lived experience and organisations to make sure that we work to develop that, and we hope that the update that we are providing does assure everyone of the priority that is attached to this important piece of work. In terms of the scope of the guidance, with regard to other genetic conditions or learning disability, a commitment was made during the bill's passage through Parliament to consider the links and overlaps with other genetic conditions and or a learning disability. Therefore, while the guidance will be Down syndrome specific, in line with the government's statutory duty, which we're very clear about under the Act, it will also include references to where the guidance could have wider effect. And we want to take wider benefit. We want to take the opportunity through the guidance to help as many people as possible and provide good practice examples to support relevant authorities to implement improvements in practice. With regard to employment, we heard through engaging with our partners that employment is crucial to improving life outcomes, and people with Down syndrome can bring many skills and strengths to the workplace, and we want every person with Down syndrome who can and wants to work to have the right support and opportunity to do that, and that is why dedicated chapter employment will be included within the guidance. In terms of implementing the guidance, we know that ultimately much of this depends on how the guidance is put into practice across our communities. To support implementation, NHS England published statutory guidance on the 9th of May 2023 requiring that every ICB had a named lead for Down syndrome, and I think the honourable gentleman said that only one of those, and I recognise that name because it's my own area, so well done them. But if that hasn't happened, that was in 2023. The executive lead for Down syndrome will lead on supporting the chief executive and the board to ensure the ICB performs its functions effectively in the interests of people with Down syndrome. And we recognise the importance of ensuring that people with Down syndrome are able to make complaints if they have concerns about the quality of and access to care. And we expect the named lead to ensure concerns are acted upon on the local level. In my closing remarks, I think I've only got a minute to go. This week has been a powerful reminder of how far we have come regarding awareness of Down syndrome. It's also made us reflect that there's much more to do. When the guidance is launched for public consultation, we would welcome members' support to ensure that the communities you represent are aware of the consultation and can share their views. I'll just highlight the issue of regression, which my Honourable Member Thurrock mentioned, and the guidance will obviously deal with specific health needs, of which regression will be part of that. Can I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman again for securing this debate and for everyone joining the discussion today. Particularly like to thank the chairs of the APPG, the Honourable Member for East Hampshire and for Mid Cheshire for the work they do. To everyone who works tirelessly to improve our support systems and services, it is incumbent upon us all, working with people with Down syndrome and their families and carers, to get this done. And I do appreciate there's been a number of requests for my honourable friend for Aberrant and my state to meet with different individuals and groups. I know he's very keen to do that. I won't make specific commitments, even though the Honourable tempts me, but I will make the commitment that he will be in touch via his office with colleagues who have raised those requests today to make sure we make the best use of the time and bring people with us on the implementation of this guidance, which I know is so crucial to this, and I remember that time from the Act, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this debate this afternoon.
Graham Stewart to wind up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We've had, I think, 10 speeches in this debate, which is fantastic, and I think the standout speech we all agree was that from the Honourable Member for Thurrock. But it's great to have the whole House coming together in this way, a number of colleagues focused on it, and to have the pledges from the Minister. So I think we can move forward with enthusiasm, engage with the Minister from Aberafan, and I think led by the co-chairs of the APPG, we can make sure we have a streamlined meeting or meetings to ensure that the Minister's time is best used and the voices of the community are also heard, and this guidance is swiftly produced. Thank you, Mr. Turner.
House has considered Down syndrome. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. And of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order.